If you assume that it's all true, you might as well just watch wrestling.
Welcome to the BJ Show. Let's rock and roll. Rock and roll. Come on, everybody. Let's lose control. Brad and John, they're the ones to follow. Yeah, ready for the ride. It's the BJ Show. BJ Show.
It is the BJ Show. I am Brad. He is John. He's the guy that every single day wakes up early every single morning, not Saturdays, Sundays off like school teachers and things like that. He's here every single morning doing the the JohnCombest.com site. He puts together what he thinks are the top things that are going on in the state of Missouri. Could be on the internet, could be a press release from various organizations, could be a video, could be all sorts of crazy things, but he puts it on JohnCombest.com. Then he puts it on our radio station, this very radio station owned by Egbert, E-G-G-B-O-R-T, Egbert.com, and he gives us, how many do we do now, John?
We do 3, Brad, 3.
The top 3. And here, walking into the studio, is the guy who counts it all down.
We're on our way to the number 1 in 3rd place.
Clean out that spare bedroom, Brad. You know why? Because students in the St. Louis area need your help. This story is brought to us, the first piece that we'll talk about today, Brad, is brought to us by the St. Louis Post-Dispatch reporter, Monica Obranovic. And here's how it starts, Brad. Students were scrambling for a place to live, and professors were wondering if they'd teach again. You know that Toni Braxton song, Brad? If I could ever teach again, teach again. Brad, we don't know if these professors will ever teach again. We don't know if these students will ever be housed. That's the price they pay, Brad, for standing up to violence, for standing up to Boeing, for standing up for their First Amendment rights on private property at Washington University. The drama continues, Brad. And surprisingly, in these stories, it appears as though Washington University is showing a little bit of backbone and standing up to these protesters. Have you seen some of this coverage, Brad?
Well, I have. So in other words, what you're leading up to, they're going to suspend him or they're going to kick him out of school for good?
I don't think they're going to go that far, Brad. But they're starting, a journey of 1,000 suspensions starts with a single excommunication. So some of these students are telling their sad stories, Brad. There's a gentleman who is from Kansas City. He had a pretty funny line because, according to him, the campus, the university reached out to him on Sunday morning and said, hey, you have until 8 p.m. to get your stuff and get out of here. And he said, but I pay $80,000 a year to go here. You can't kick me out. And they said, yes, we can. We can at least ask you to get off campus. So it's become a whole thing. And the really interesting thing about this, I think, Brad, is that you have next year in St. Louis City a mayoral election. And a gentleman pointed this out on Twitter, a guy named Jack Groen. He tweets under the name McPherson from McPherson Publishing. It's McPherstl. Anyway, but he pointed out that over the weekend, Brad, you had Megan Green looking for the support of the hard left, locking arms with these protesters and pointing a finger in the police's face. But you had St. Louis Mayor Tashara Jones talking about traffic enforcement and continuing to talk about crime. Now, what would it say, Brad, if going into next year's mayoral election, you had Tashara Jones making sense and talking about law and order, and you had someone to Tashara Jones left talking about, we can't have police here on a campus. This is free speech. I'm an adjunct professor. You can't do that to me.
Yeah, but
what if somebody outflanks Tashara Jones on the left, Brad? Could you imagine?
Well, let me ask you a question, though. So you're talking about the guy, so they did suspend him? He's kicked off the campus?
No, they're not suspended. They have to get off of campus, and they can still take their exams virtually, but they can't come back to campus and do it.
So they've been banned from, not that he's just banned from his residence hall, he's been banned from physically setting foot on the campus.
That's exactly right. Correct.
Okay, but he's still a student then?
Yeah, he's still a student. Yeah, they haven't been, kicked out of school.
I don't understand that. If you're going, that's like okay, we caught you speeding. You can't drive your Corvette anymore, but it's okay if you drive your Ferrari. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah, I know what you mean.
I mean, like, give them the old 1-2 punch. Say, not only you're banned from campus, dude, you're kicked out of school, and you've got a 3-year suspension. Go to 270 Tech for a while.
Yeah.
Right?
Now, a friend of mine texted me about this yesterday, and we were going back and forth on this, and I said, can you imagine the punishment and the horror if someone came to you, Brad, in your day in college and said, listen, we are really mad at you, so instead of taking your exam in this classroom, you have to take it from home. Like, can you imagine the horror, Brad, of having to sit at a computer and take your final exams rather than sitting in a classroom? Like, John, I don't know how this young man will recover.
I'll be honest with you. This whole thing to me, I mean, if you've seen what happened last night, early this morning, where they've taken over the, I guess, what they call the administration building. I don't think it's technically administration buildings, where the dean's offices in Columbia, and they broke windows and they did this. I'm going like, okay, you've crossed the line. You know?
Yeah. And you know what surprises me, Brad, when I saw that, actually I didn't see that until this morning. When I saw that, it makes me wonder how, if you're Washington University, how you keep people from getting into your camp, like how good your security has to be to keep that same thing from happening. And years ago, Brad, I would get the date wrong if I attempted to guess this, but there were students that were making noise about things like cafeteria worker pay. You remember during the whole like Occupy Wall Street thing?
Right.
I think it was around that time. But students got into the main hall that you see when you think of WashU and you think of Brookings Hall where the quad is. And students got in the administration building and sat and they did a sit-in and they said, we're not going to leave unless we get what we want. And the administration folded like an accordion, Brad, and they let him stay there, and they brought him food. Oh, we appreciate the fact that you're, squatting in our administration building, and it's surprising. I don't know. I mean, frankly, I'm surprised to see the guy that leads WashU is a guy named Andrew Martin, and he is a white male. And you don't see many white males in academia standing up to any demand or any protest. So we'll see how long this lasts, Brad.
Here, you know how you fix this whole problem?
I heard that National Rent-A-Fence has a solution.
We talked about that the other day.
Yesterday. And you know what, Brad? I went to their YouTube page. They have quite a presence. What a business model.
Yeah, what you didn't even know there was a company called that.
I had no idea.
You thought I was making that up. National Rent-A-Fence is a company that rents fences, and they do them at construction sites. And my suggestion was you just call National Rent-A-Fence and say, okay, we need a fence to go around this area. You fence it in. You essentially say, okay, you want to stay? Fine, you can stay, but you can't come out. So
yesterday, Brad, on the show, I listened back to it, and you made a reference that I didn't get in the moment, which was Hotel California.
Well, the whole
you could check out, but you can never leave.
But see, all it is, what was it? Where was the place that they occupied some building? I don't think it was about this. It was about something else. And the students were complaining because when they were ordering DoorDash stuff, they were ordering Uber Eats and things like that, the administration said, no, sorry, can't come in, can't deliver your food. And they're going, it's terrible. We can't get our DoorDash. It's like, okay.
Yeah, they should have thought of that. Well, it's a little bit of entitlement. But, you're on a college campus, Brad. You're used to being waited on hand and foot.
God,
I don't know why you couldn't get – I don't know why Uber couldn't send a drone in,
Well, the police department would have target practice.
They sure would.
Let's put a couple.
And you know what? We're going to get back to a national story in a minute when we hit number one, Brad.
Well, okay. One last comment on this. Okay. Yeah. Once again, you don't see this at Southeast Missouri State. You don't see this at Missouri State.
Yeah.
You don't see this at what's the Central Missouri State in Warrensburg.
Might have it at Mizzou. Sorry to interrupt, Brad, but we might have it at Mizzou. I believe. Now, I don't have this up today, but I believe that I saw on social media there was a little bit of chatter. I'm sure that activists at Mizzou are having a little bit of protest envy And they're thinking, oh, why do those rich kids at WashU get all the fun? We want to be on television too.
But it's see, you misspoke there, John. It's not the activist student, it's the outside activist who show up with boxes of brand new tents from REI.
Fair point.
And they're all the same color. And yesterday they had this picture, there's a picture on a couple different websites of all the professors, the faculty who are arm in arm, who were protecting the students. They were protecting the protest areas, Columbia. And everyone had the exact same construction vest on, brand new, out of the box. How did that happen? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, probably community donations, Brad.
Yeah, right.
Probably they just rubbed a couple nickels together. Maybe they clipped some coupons and got them. What happens to these tents after the protest? Because I'm more of an indoorsman. To quote my friend Greg Keller, he calls himself an avid indoorsman. I'm more of an indoorsman. But you know what? If I could get a good deal on a tent, I wouldn't be opposed to it. Have the kids, spend the night outside.
Would you stay outside with them or just put them outside in the tent?
Oh, absolutely not. And I mean, the ironic thing is, if you've seen some of these at these protests, Brad, like the St. Louis, have you seen some of these professors that are protesting?
Yeah.
I mean, it's the first time a tent has been pitched around them in decades.
Let me think. I was watching the coverage there on Channel 5, and I saw Professor Wingding and Professor Wacko. I saw all the
Wingding's a good one. Yeah, she has that women's studies class. You go in on the first day, they cut your hair and tell you you're an activist. They also put you, Brad, they confiscate all your heels, don't they?
Yeah, you have to wear Birkenstocks. I get it. Okay, here we go.
Up a notch to number 2.
Number 2.
Our long national nightmare is over. Well, maybe not national nightmare, but Missouri nightmare. Finally, Brad. As you know, any therapist will tell you sometimes you need a little bit of closure, and that's what Dean Plocher got yesterday from the House Ethics Committee. The Ethics Committee voted in a bipartisan way to dismiss the complaint and close the report against Dean Plocher. And in fact, Brad, the Republican chair of the committee, a woman named Hannah Kelly, teamed up with her Democrat co-chair, a guy named Robbie Sauls from Independence, and they wanted to have the final report note that Dean Plocher obstructed the investigation, that he was guilty of obstruction and he did not make this process easy. And the bipartisan panel, Brad, voted that down and said, no, we're not going to include in this final report, as we dismiss this, we're not going to condemn him for allegedly obstructing this investigation. Now, this turned out better for Dean Plocher than I thought, Brad. At the beginning of this thing, I said clearly that Dean Plocher should not just say, hey, I messed up, and hey, I'm not going to have my wife be the treasurer anymore. It's fine to have your spouse be a treasurer. I think if nobody's paying attention and nobody really cares and you're running unopposed. But once you get to a certain level, I think you should relieve your spouse of those duties. I thought that Dean should just apologize and be done with it. And I think although this investigation was painful for him and it was a long and arduous process, for him today to be able to come out and say, look, Democrats on this panel voted with the Republicans and said, I did not obstruct anything. I'm in the clear. I paid back whatever money I owed. Let's move on. I think this is a best case scenario for Dean Plocher.
Oh, I don't agree with you at all, John.
And why is that, Brad?
I think he should be forced to go to Washington University and mediate with the protesters. And then
he should. Dean would fit in well. He's a tall, square-jawed white man who dresses well. He would fit right in, Brad.
He would fit right in. And he probably wouldn't fit in any of their tents, right? Because he's too tall, right?
Yeah, he's a little too tall Jones for those guys. And I have it on good authority that he showered this week.
Oh, my God.
I know. When you don't smell like patchouli and bad decisions and ditchweed, you're probably not going to fit in at a protest.
You're dating yourself with the patchouli reference.
Thank you.
Because of the fact that
so good news for Dean Plocher. Remember, he is in an 8-way primary for Secretary of State, and he's still sitting on a mountain of cash, Brad.
Now, where did he get the cash from? Because of the fact that was at his campaign committee for
that
whatever?
was. And remember, Dean had originally had announced that he was running for lieutenant governor, and then kind of in the scramble, in that last minute scramble, he, along with your pal Mike Carter, Mary Elizabeth Coleman, and some others, jumped into the Secretary of State's race.
Right.
So when you're sitting on a mountain of cash And you got pretty decent name ID. Not great name ID, but a little bit of name ID. He's in a pretty good position, but boy, it's going to be a tough one.
Okay, we had not Jim, his brother, Bob Onder, jump into the lieutenant governor's race and then jump out. We had Dean Plocher jump in, jump out. Who's still in the lieutenant governor race?
A guy named Lincoln Huff, who's the appropriations chair in the Senate. So he controls a lot of purse strings down there, Brad. And a woman named Holly Rader. So Holly Rader is from Southeast Missouri. She has a hell of a story. She grew up in abject poverty. She wrote a really good book called Cinder Girl. She is also a state senator. And then we have a guy named David Wassinger. And David Wassinger is an attorney from the St. Louis area. You might remember that name. His wife was on the St. Louis County Council for many years. Her name was Colleen Wassinger.
I do remember
So
her.
we have some candidates. And I think your buddy Paul Berry might have said he was running. I don't remember. Frankly, I don't remember if he's still in that race or not.
Have you ever met Paul Berry before? Paul Berry III. You ever met Paul?
I have met him before. Yeah, many years ago.
He's an interesting guy. Wouldn't you say? Interesting?
Oh, yeah. And you know what? Just like you. Or I shouldn't say just like you, Brad.
You could put me in the same.
Many people, he says he owns radio stations. But does he own radio stations?
No, he does not.
Okay.
You're going to put me in the same boat as Paul Berry III?
I started to, but I corrected myself, Brad.
I could tell you a funny Paul Berry III story, but if I told you, you would think I made it up. Okay, it's time for number one.
The number one.
Big story from an AG candidate, Brad, but not just an AG candidate. One of Donald Trump's attorneys, Will Scharf, was on Annie Fry's show on 97.1. Shout out to Annie Fry. Brad, you talk a lot about people who don't acknowledge other radio shows, but Annie Fry has been really cool. So let's give her a little bit of credit for that. But the point is, Will Scharf was on there yesterday, and he was talking a little bit about the case against the presidential immunity case. And he, as Will is apt to do, really broke it down in plain language. And we've talked about it here before, Brad. But the idea that a moment a president leaves office, that he would be prosecuted for decisions he made related to his official duties as president just seems on its face ridiculous. And in fact, Will says that when he was at the Supreme Court last week listening to arguments, he believes that the Supreme Court will rule in Donald Trump's favor there. So that's one aspect of it, Brad. And then I would also point out today, I have a really unique link up on my website near the top, and I got it from the Twitter account of Greg Keller. Many people know Greg Keller. That's the second time I've referenced him today. He's a Republican consultant here. And there's the Daily Beast does a fundraising article, kind of like insider DC politics stuff. And uniquely, Will Scharf hired the political consultant group that had been working for Ron DeSantis. It's a group called Axiom Strategies. And there was kind of a theory, Brad, that Donald Trump might not take too kindly to that. The idea that, if you're Donald Trump and some candidate hires somebody that was super close to Ron DeSantis, that you're not going to be too fond of that. But the Daily Beast quotes an insider, and here's the quote from the Daily Beast. Trump world appears to carry a clear message. The former president supports Will Scharf. Now, in an attorney general race, Brad, where both candidates, AG Andrew Bailey, who's the incumbent, and Will Scharf will both have a lot of money, a Trump endorsement would be a huge deal. And it appears as though Donald Trump might be leaning toward his own attorney, Will Scharf.
Interesting. We need to talk about the Trump trial the next break because of the fact that I heard an interesting guy break this down. And it's sort of what I said, which is sort of ridiculous. And not the whole crux, but one of the crucial points of this whole Trump trial is this bizarre thing, including the hush money, and there's a really interesting twist to that. And I've said this before, and I have people say, no, you got it wrong. I go, no, you don't understand. I do have it right, but it's wrong. And it's a goofy, crazy thing. Okay, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back. Make sure I got this set up right. Yes.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's Combest, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?